There are some things a person carries not because they are light, but because they cannot be left behind. For Iris Dunbar, that thing was a leather satchel no bigger than a man's boot, cracked at the seams and dark with years of oil and use. Inside it were 4 small tools, a fine chisel, a round-nosed gouge, a skew, and a bent scraper, wrapped in a square of brown flannel and tied with a piece of cord. They had belonged to her grandfather, Edwin Dunbar, the best furniture maker in Greer County, Montana, and he had pressed them into her hands 2 weeks before he died. "These will take you further than money," he had told her. "Money runs out. A good hand doesn't." She had believed him, because Edwin Dunbar had never lied to her about anything. What she had not believed, and perhaps should have, was that the people around her were capable of moving so fast. "We want to tell you her story, because we think you need to hear it. Not for the heroics, though there are some. Not for the cruelty, though there is plenty of that too. But because of what she did with nothing. And because of what nothing taught her about everything." The letter came on a Tuesday in late October, 1893. Iris was 22 years old and had been living in the house on Birch Hollow Road for all of them. It was Edwin's house first, a modest 2-room place he had built himself from ponderosa pine and river stone, situated on 40 acres of timber and pasture land in the foothills outside the town of Kettner. After he died, she had stayed. There was no reason to go anywhere else. She had his workshop out back, his tools, his contracts with the furniture merchant in town, and the work itself, which she understood and loved, and which paid enough to keep the lights on and the larder half full. She was not prospering exactly, but she was managing. She thought that was enough. The letter was from a lawyer in Billings, whose name was Standish Core. It was 3 pages long, and written in the kind of language that was designed not to be understood. She read it twice at the kitchen table, her morning coffee going cold, and then she read it once more, slowly, translating each sentence as she went. The essential facts, stripped of their legal dressing, were these. Edwin Dunbar had died without a formal will on record. His only surviving blood relation, beyond Iris herself, was a man named Douglas Dunbar, Edwin's younger brother, who had left Montana for Portland 15 years ago and had not written once since. Douglas Dunbar had filed a claim on the estate through Standish Core's office, because Iris was not a blood relative by law. She was Edwin's granddaughter by his first wife, who had died young, and Douglas was his half-brother, who shared only a father. The claim was being processed under a provision that allowed next of kin to contest unverified inheritance. In plainer language, Douglas Dunbar wanted the house, the land, and everything on them. And the law, as Standish Core very carefully explained, was inclined to let him have it. She had 60 days. Iris set the letter down on the table. She looked at the wall across from her, where Edwin's plans were still pinned. A roll-top desk he had designed but not started. A rocking chair for the Kettner schoolteacher. A set of cabinet doors for the hotel in Havre. She looked at the window and threw it at the workshop. Its shingle roof gray, with morning frost. The door she had left open a crack because she had been in there before dawn. Fitting a drawer. She had been in the middle of a drawer. She had been thinking about the way the dovetails fit and whether she needed to adjust her angle. She did not cry. She noted this about herself the way a person notes the temperature or the direction of the wind. There was a tremor of something in her chest, cold and electric, but it was not grief exactly. It was the sensation of the floor dropping out from under you and realizing, before you hit anything, that you are going to have to decide very quickly how to fall. She got up, refilled her coffee, and sat back down. She wrote the facts on a piece of brown paper, the same kind she used for furniture templates. On one side she wrote what I have. On the other she wrote what I need. What she had. 60 days, approximately $19 in cash, the tools in the satchel, Edwin's larger shop tools, 2 finished pieces waiting for delivery, and the skills to make more. She had Junko, her brown and white mare, and a light wagon. She had no family she could call on. Her mother had died when Iris was 4. Her father had remarried and moved to Wyoming and had a new family and had made it abundantly clear, in the polite and devastating way that some people manage, that she was not a part of it. What she needed. A lawyer, or the money for one, and a place to stay if she lost the house. She needed time and income and some way to fight a man she had never met in a legal system she did not understand. She looked at the 2 lists for a long while. Then she folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket, next to the letter from Standish Core, and she went back to the workshop to finish the drawer. If you are wondering why she went back to work, we think you already know the answer. Some people, when the world collapses around them, go very still. And in that stillness they find, not comfort exactly, but clarity. The work was what she knew. The work was where her hands did not shake. She would finish the drawer, and then she would figure out the rest. The town of Kettner, Montana, had 1,700 people in it, and a main street that ran 6 blocks from the river to the rail depot. There was a general store, a hotel, 2 saloons, a Methodist church, a post office, a blacksmith, and a furniture merchant named August Hollins, who had been Edwin Dunbar's primary buyer for 11 years. Iris drove Junko into town 2 days after the letter arrived. She went to Hollins's shop first, because she had 2 pieces to deliver, a side table in white oak and a set of 4 ladder-back chairs, and because she needed to understand what her near-term income looked like. Hollins was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with a careful measuring eye that he turned on furniture and people alike. He had bought her work for the past 8 months without complaint. He had also attended Edwin's funeral and had said afterward, quietly and without fuss, that he was glad to see she intended to carry on. He helped her unload the pieces from the wagon and examined each one in the afternoon light that came through his shop windows. He ran his thumb along the mortise joints on the chairs. He opened the drawer of the side table and closed it several times, feeling the action. He checked the underside of the tabletop for warping. "Solid," he said. "Better than the last lot, if I'm being honest. Your biscuit joints are cleaner." He named a price that was fair, slightly better than what Edwin had gotten for similar work. He counted the money from his till and set it on the counter. Iris told him about the letter. She had not planned to, but Hollins was one of those people who listen with their whole face, and something about that invited plain speaking. He did not say he was sorry. He said, "Douglas Dunbar, I know that name." He paused, tapping one finger against the counter. Edwin mentioned him once. Said he'd borrowed money from their father's estate and never pays a cent back. Said he wouldn't know an honest day's work if it introduced itself. He looked at her steadily. "You'll want to talk to Lawrence Cade. He's not a big city lawyer, but he's sharp, and he knew Edwin personally. His office is above the post office." She had $41 now. She went upstairs. Lawrence Cade was 60 years old, thin as a rail fence, with a white mustache, and the careful, unhurried manner of a man who had learned long ago that most things worth doing could not be rushed. His office smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. He listened to her without interrupting, read the letter from Standish Coeur, and then read it again. He set it down on his desk. "Well," he said, "Standish Coeur is not wrong about the law. He's also not telling you everything the law says." He folded his hands. "There is a doctrine called rightful occupancy. It holds that a person who has maintained and improved a property, who has operated it as their primary residence and place of livelihood, has a claim that cannot simply be erased by a competing petition from a party who has made no such contribution." He paused. "Your grandfather may not have had a will on record in Billings. But did he leave you anything in writing? Anything at all?" Iris thought, and then she remembered. She had not thought about them in months. They were on the second shelf of the bookcase in the front room, a row of 12 slim journals, each one dated on the spine in Edwin's cramped, angular hand. He had kept them for 40 years. Furniture plans, measurements, sketches, the names of customers and what they had paid, notes about wood grain and joinery techniques, records of every piece he had ever made. He had given her the last 3 himself, in the weeks before he died, sitting in the armchair by the window with a blanket over his legs. "These are yours," he had told her. "Everything I learned is in here." She told Lawrence Cade about the journals. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Bring them to me." She brought them the following morning. All 12. Cade spent 4 hours with them while she waited in the chair across from his desk, her hands still for once. He read slowly, turning pages, occasionally making a note. Around noon he looked up. "There are entries here going back to 1871, he said. "They include records of payments made to Douglas Dunbar, 3 separate loans over 7 years, the most recent in 1879. They include a passage, dated April 1886, in which your grandfather writes, and I am quoting directly, 'My intention is that this property and the shop and all its tools shall pass to Iris when I am gone. She has learned every part of this trade, and she is the one who has made it live. Douglas is welcome to visit if he ever comes back to Montana, but what is built here belongs to her.'" Cade set the journal down. "That is not a legal will, but it is contemporaneous documentation of intent in your grandfather's own hand, in a document he explicitly gave you. Combined with your 8 years of residence, your maintenance of the property, and your active commercial operation of the workshop, it constitutes a significant counter-argument." He named his fee. She paid half up front. She left the journals with him and drove back to Birch Hollow Road and went back to work. "Now we want to stop here for a moment, because we think it is worth naming what she was actually doing. She was not waiting. She was not hoping. She was building a case the only way she knew how. The way Edwin had taught her, by measuring twice and cutting once, by trusting the joints to hold, by doing the next right thing. The work she was sending to Hollands each week was not just income, it was proof. Every delivery was a receipt, a record, a quiet argument that said, "This workshop is alive, and she is the reason." Douglas Dunbar arrived in Kettner in the second week of November. He was 54 years old and wore a suit that had been expensive once and had not been cleaned in some time. He came by train and stayed at the hotel and made it known, to anyone who would listen over drinks, that he had been terribly wronged by the situation and intended to see it put right. He told people he had always meant to come back to Montana. He said Edwin had promised him an equal share. He said the girl had no real claim, being only a step relation and not blood. Word of this got back to Iris quickly. Kettner was not a large town. She heard it from the woman at the post office, from August Hollands, when she came in with a corner cabinet, and from the blacksmith's wife who lived 2 properties down, and whose son had overheard Douglas in the saloon. She listened to each account without comment. She thanked people for telling her, and went home, but she noted something in what she heard. Douglas Dunbar was talking to everyone in town except Lawrence Cade, because Standish Coeur had told him the matter was proceeding through proper legal channels and did not require any direct discussion with opposing counsel. He was also, notably, not talking to any furniture merchants or craftspeople. He was not going into the workshop. He was telling his story in places where the audience was sympathetic but uninformed. She thought about that. She thought about it the way she thought about a difficult joint, not with frustration, but with attention. Where was the grain? Where was the weakness? What was the true shape of the thing? In the 3rd week of November, she did something she had not planned to do. She went to see Douglas Dunbar herself. She went in the morning, before the hotel dining room closed, and she found him at a corner table, eating eggs and reading a newspaper. She sat down across from him without being invited. He looked up with the startled expression of a man who was accustomed to controlling the terms of every conversation. She introduced herself. She said her name clearly. She did not apologize for sitting down. He recovered quickly and gave her a look that was meant to be sympathetic. "Miss Dunbar," he said, "I have nothing against you personally. This is simply a matter of family property. Edwin was my brother, and what he built." "What he built," she said, "he built with his hands. I know because I watched him, and because I've been building it with mine for 8 months since he died." She kept her voice level. "I'm not here to argue the legal question with you. Lawrence Cade is doing that. I came because I thought you should see something." She opened the leather satchel and set it on the table between them. The 4 tools lay on their flannel square, worn and precise and perfectly kept. "He gave me these the week before he died," she said. "He taught me for 6 years. I know every piece of furniture in that workshop, every contract with every buyer, every measurement in every journal. What I'm doing on that property is what he wanted done. I can't make you believe that, but I thought you should have to look at it." She folded the flannel back over the tools, put the satchel over her shoulder, and stood up. "The journals," she said, "are with Lawrence Cade." She walked out. She did not know then what that conversation would do. She found out later from Hollands, who heard it from the hotel owner, who had been wiping the counter nearby. Douglas Dunbar had sat for a long time after she left. He had not finished his eggs. He had asked the hotel owner, somewhat abruptly, whether it was true that the workshop was still operating. The hotel owner said yes. He had seen a corner cabinet come through just the other week. Beautiful piece. Dunbar's granddaughter did fine work. Douglas had not said anything more. The legal proceedings went on for another 3 weeks. There was a hearing in Billings, which Lawrence Cade attended alone, and which cost Iris another $12 she did not particularly have. She spent those 3 weeks working. She finished the roll-top desk from Edwin's plans, the one he had drawn but not started. It was the hardest piece she had ever made, with a timber top that required over 40 individually fitted slats of quarter-sawn white oak. She got the action wrong 3 times before she got it right. She ran her hand across the finished surface and felt the slats move, smooth and even, and for the first time since October she let herself feel something that was not calculation. She thought of Edwin. She thought of him saying, "These will take you further than money." The decision from the Billings County Clerk's office came in a letter that Lawrence Cade brought to her in person, which she understood was a good sign. He drove out to Birch Hollow Road on a Friday afternoon in mid-December, knocked on the workshop door rather than the house door. which she also took as a sign that he understood her, and came inside. He stood in the warmth of the workshop, looking at the roll-top desk on the bench, and for a moment he did not say anything. "That is a beautiful piece of work," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Tell me," he told her. The occupancy claim had been upheld. The journals, in combination with her documented commercial activity and her uninterrupted residence, had established a sufficient record of Edwin's intent and her rightful succession. Douglas Dunbar's petition had been denied. Standish Court had filed a notice of intent to appeal, but Cade's assessment was that the appeal had little ground to stand on, and that Douglas Dunbar's history of borrowing from family estates without repayment had not helped his credibility with the clerk. The property was hers. She thanked Lawrence Cade, paid the remainder of his fee plus a little extra, and saw him to his buggy. She stood at the edge of the yard as he drove back down Birch Hollow Road, the winter trees bare and black against the gray sky. The air smelled of pine sap and coming snow. She went back into the workshop and stood at the bench for a while, not doing anything, just standing. The roll-top desk was sold to a railroad man in Havre for more money than any single piece Edwin had ever made. August Hollins brokered the sale and was openly pleased. "I told him you'd learned from the best," he said. "Then I told him you'd gotten better." He was not a man who gave compliments easily, and so she believed him. Douglas Dunbar left Kettner the same week the decision came. No one saw him go. He did not say goodbye to anyone, as far as Iris could tell, which she supposed was appropriate. He had not said hello to anyone who mattered either. The winter was long and cold as Montana winters are, but the workshop was warm. She had spent part of the settlement savings. She had not touched her operating money. On a proper iron stove for the shop, one that burned clean and kept the space at a workable temperature, even when the thermometer outside dropped to 15 below. She worked 6 days a week. She did not work Sundays, because Edwin had not worked Sundays, and she intended to keep his habits in the ways she could. By spring, she had a contract with a hotel in Havre, and a standing arrangement with a new furniture merchant who had opened in Billings and who had come all the way to Kettner to see her workshop after hearing about the roll-top desk. She hired a boy from town to help with rough cuts and loading, because the volume had gotten beyond what she could manage alone. His name was Clem, he was 15, and he was a fast learner, which was the quality she valued most. She did not move the satchel from its hook by the workshop door. The 4 tools stayed where they were, wrapped in their flannel, available, but not in daily use. They were not decoration. They were the things she reached for when she needed to be precise, when a piece required the kind of attention that only those particular edges could give. She thought of them as Edwin's hands. She thought of herself as the continuation of something he had started. Some people said she had won. She didn't think of it that way. Winning implied an opponent she had beaten, and she had not beaten Douglas Dunbar. He had simply failed to find anything worth taking, because what she had built could not be repossessed. It was in the joints of everything she made. It was in the ledger she kept, the customers she served, the young man she was now teaching to measure twice. It was not land or money or a piece of paper, though she had all of those things now. It was the work. Edwin had known that from the beginning. She understood it fully now. She had not been handed anything. She had made what she had, made it in the truest sense, with tools and time, and the knowledge a good man had trusted her to carry forward. The satchel hung by the door. The workshop was warm. Outside, the spring mud of Birch Hollow Road was beginning to dry, and she was already building the next thing. "We'd like to ask you something before we go. When someone you loved left you behind, what did they leave in your hands? Was it something you've used, or is it still waiting?"